When Joder saw the dim light, he breathed a sigh of relief. He hurried towards it and found a gap. He began to expand it until he was able to penetrate it. Then he continued, sometimes running and at other times walking. He falls and gets up. The night became dark and the howling of wolves began to be heard. So Jawdar lit a big fire and remained watching in fear. Until he fell asleep and slept for a little while. He soon woke up to the sunlight. So Jawdar continued on his way until he became tired. He fell unconscious in front of a huge palace, and when he opened his eyes, he saw 7 beautiful fairies gathered around him. One of them said,
"He is fine." He waked up.
Jawdar asked,
"Where am I? Who are you?"
The fairies smiled. One of them answered him,
"We are fairies and we live here in this palace of our father. We saw you unconscious in front of the door. So we let you in. Are you well? Do you want us to bring you food or water?"
Joder nodded his head in the affirmative. A long time had passed since he had not eaten anything. And when Jawdar calmed down, they asked him about his story. He began to tell it to them with tears in his eyes. Then the little fairy stopped him and asked,
"Did you say the old wizard Hassan? You are lucky to be alive. My father warned us a lot about it. He's an evil wizard, even my father fears him."
Joder stayed with the little fairies and enjoy it. They became like a family, having fun and laughing. And they began to introduce him to the palace, which contains 100 rooms. A room full of jewels. Others are full of gold. And the third is full of silverware. Jawdar asked,
"Your father must be very rich."
The fairy laughed and said,
"Gold and jewelry are of no value to us. But we like to decorate with it. That's it."
Jawdar said,
"So, what are the things of value to you?"
So the little fairy took him to another room. She opened it and said,
"Crafts. That's what we like."
Then Jawdar saw shields and swords, and he said,
"I am a blacksmith. I also love fine crafts."
He carried one of the swords. It was without a sheath. Its blade is covered with a layer of copper. And he began to meditate on the mastery of his maker. Heading towards the window to see it in the light, he noticed 2 figures in the distance riding 2 horses. Then his anger intensified. He jumped out of the window. Then he rode a horse and found it in front of him. He went towards the 2 people at the highest speed. When he reached them, he shouted,
"Hassan, you deceitful old man. Here we meet again."
He waved the sword in his hand. And he struck the sorcerer's neck with it. His head flew into the air. And the horse took off, running with the carcass. Then he turned to the boy who was with him. He was terrified by what happened. And he said to him,
"Do not be afraid. This magician deceived me just as he deceived you. And he left me to die. If my time had not come, I would have died in one of the caves. Go home, boy, and forget what happened to you. A new life has been written for you."
Jawdar carried the magician's head and remembered his words. That his soul is in that palace. He returned to the fairies and told them what had happened. Then the little fairy said to him,
"Didn't I tell you that you are lucky? My father has been searching for the sword in your hand for a long time. This sword is the only one capable of killing the evil magician. And you chose it from everything in the room."
Jawdar replied,
"I picked up the sword by accident. As for the magician, it caught him by surprise. If he had not been surprised to see me alive. Who knows, maybe he was the one who killed me.
Because he saved them from the evil of the magician Hassan. They were happy with it and threw a party on this occasion. Their admiration for him increased, and after a period of time, the fairies told Joder that every year they visited their father once. The time has come to visit him. They will be absent for a week. They will leave him in the palace until they return. We gave him the keys to the palace rooms. They told him that he could open all the rooms except one. The one at the end of the hall and its golden key. So Joder told them that he would not open it. The fairies said goodbye to Joder and flew off into the sunset. And Joder waved at them sadly. They had become accustomed to each other, and it was difficult to part with them. Joder entered the palace and continued to walk around it, opening the rooms and looking at what was in them. Until he reached the end of the hallway. He was overcome with curiosity. Why did the fairies warn him away from that room? What is in it? Questions abounded in his head, and then he resolved to open them. He went towards her and inserted the key. He turned around with some fear and curiosity in his heart. Then he pushed the door and entered, and it was a small, empty room. It has a small window. There's nothing special about it. Joder went to the window as he searched the room. He wonders why the fairies prevented him from entering it when there was nothing in it. Until he reached the window. He looked out of it and found that night had fallen there. Joder was surprised, because the day was still early. While in this direction the moon is full, it overlooks a waterfall from which steam emerges when it meets the ground. In a big lake. Among the bushes in a scene as if in a beautiful dream. While he was enjoying the view, 7 shadows loomed in the moonlight. Of great swans, and they alighted among the bushes. And the swans took off the feathers that covered them. Then there were 7 beautiful girls. One of them was so beautiful, her body radiated with light. Joder was astonished by what he saw. He continued to enjoy the sight of the girls playing and splashing with the lake water among them. In charming laughter that captured Joder's heart. Then they came out of the lake and put on their feathers. So they became swans as they were. And they flew back from whence they came. Then Joder woke up and started calling for them to come back, but to no avail. Where the swans were, they disappeared in the distant horizon of the moon. Joder remained at the window waiting for them to return. The day came, and a day passed, and another day passed, and he remained in his place. He waited without eating or drinking until the little fairies returned from their father's house. So they searched for Joder until they found him at the window. When they touched him, he fell unconscious from extreme hunger and thirst. So the fairies took him to another room. They took care of him until he woke up, and the little fairy said to him,
"Didn't we warn you not to enter that room? Why did you disobey our order?"
So Joder apologized, and saying,
"I'm sorry, but I was curious. I didn't feel like myself until I was inside the room. I hope you will excuse me."
Then the fairies asked him about what he saw in the room. So he told them everything he had seen and asked them who that girl was. Then the little fairy answered him,
"These are princesses from the jinn. Their father was a great king among the kings of the jinn. He has 7 princesses and 7 princes. We do not know anything about them except that they come to this palace once a year. We are guarding this palace for them by order of our father."
"How can I access them? I want to marry one of them."
"You can't reach them. Didn't you hear what I told you? Their father is a king of the jinn. It has powerful armies and strict rules."
"I don't care even if I lose my life. I will marry that girl even if it is the last thing I do."
Joder recovered quickly. But he did not return to his previous era. Despite the fairy's attempts to bring joy to his heart. However, he became worried and always sad. He thinks about the girl he saw that day. Then the little fairy said to him,
I'll help you catch the girl. Although this will cause many problems.
But the other fairies warned her. They reminded her that by doing this, she was violating all her covenants. However, the fairy replied to them that she was sure that Jawdar was lucky. They will not be in the palace when he catches her. Joder was very happy. He thanked the little fairy. The little fairy said to him,
You have to wait until it's time for the princesses to return. Then you wait until they pluck their feathers. You must make sure of the feathers of the princess you want. Because every princess has her own dress. Then you take it and hide it. No matter how much she begs you, you must not return her feather dress. Because she will leave. And you won't find it again.
As soon as you leave, I will go to the place where they are staying. And they finished it well so that they would not see me. And I wait for them, I have nothing to do in your absence except this.
And the time came for Joder to bid farewell to the fairies. He went towards the room and opened it. Then he jumped out of the window. And he went to the place where the swans landed. He hid himself well among the bushes. And he kept waiting.